What would you do if you discovered the man you were scheduled to execute was innocent? That is the nightmare facing Warden Elena Ruiz. 20 years ago, she was the clerk who processed Isaiah Cole's file. Now, just days before his execution, she uncovers the one piece of evidence that proves his innocence. She is now in a desperate race against the very system she commands. If you believe that the truth must be told, please like this video and subscribe so these stories are not buried. Stay with us, because this is the true story of a 20-year-old lie and a stay of execution that arrived 1 minute too late. 20 years ago, he signed away his life for a crime he didn't commit. The prosecutor called him a monster. The headline said, "Father turns killer." His wife lost their home trying to pay the lawyers. His little girl grew up believing her daddy was a murderer. And by the time the truth began to crawl out of the shadows, it was already too late. That's how his story begins, not with blood, not with violence, but with a betrayal that burned slower and longer than any wound. Tonight, the clock above his cell ticks toward midnight. Isaiah sits alone under the humming fluorescent light, writing what he calls a letter to peace. The guards think it's another confession. It isn't. It's a goodbye. He's 52 now, a man carved by time and silence. Before all this, he was a mechanic in Houston, the kind of man who fixed everything but himself. He had strong hands, a quiet laugh, and a promise he never broke: to be home for dinner. Maya, his wife, used to call him her steady ground. Their daughter Ava was 2 when they took him away. She used to run to the door whenever she heard an engine, thinking it was her daddy coming home. For 20 years, Isaiah lived in a 6x9 cell inside a Texas prison, watching other men walk the last mile before him. He learned how to pray without words, how to survive without sunlight. Every night, he traced the face of his daughter in memory, afraid the details might fade. The curl of her hair, the dimple near her left cheek. The world outside forgot him, but he never stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, God's mercy was still listening. He once told the chaplain, "I'm not waiting for freedom, I'm waiting for forgiveness." And that's what makes Isaiah different from the rest of the death row inmates here in Texas. He doesn't curse the system or beg for time. He just wants one thing before his last sunrise: to see the faces he loved, the ones he lost because justice took too long to find him. In a place built to break men, he still holds on to something no one can confiscate: faith in God, and the hope that even a condemned man deserves one final truth. Outside, the desert wind scrapes against the bars. The night is heavy, but his hands are steady as he folds the letter and writes the final line: "Forgive not for heaven, but for peace." Then he closes his eyes, as if listening for a door to open, somewhere beyond the sound of keys and chains. The next morning, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. Isaiah didn't look up. He already knew that rhythm, the slow, steady steps of authority. When the cell door opened, he heard a woman's voice, firm but careful. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you have a visitor." It wasn't his lawyer. It wasn't the chaplain. It was her, Elena Ruiz, the warden. She stood in the doorway, the kind of woman who carried control like armor. Her gray uniform was spotless, her voice even. But her eyes looked like someone who hadn't slept through a full night in years. Isaiah rose slowly, his wrists cuffed in front of him. "Didn't think wardens did house calls," he said with a dry smile. Elena didn't smile back. "I wanted to speak to you personally. Your execution's been scheduled for Friday." He nodded, as if she'd told him the weather. "I figured as much." For a moment, silence filled the small space between them. The hum of the fluorescent light, the rattle of distant chains, the breath she tried to steady. "I'll make this short," she continued. "As protocol requires, you're entitled to one last request." Isaiah looked at the wall, the scratch marks left by men who'd come before him. "Just one?" "One," she said. He exhaled softly. "Then I want to see my family, my wife, my daughter." Elena hesitated. It wasn't the request she expected. You know how complicated that is, she said. I do. He looked at her, eyes calm. But you asked. That's my request. She tried to maintain her tone, but something in him, his gentleness, his quiet, unsettled her. It's been 20 years, she said. Do you even know where they are now? He gave a faint nod. Somewhere safe, I hope. My daughter's grown now. Probably doesn't remember my voice. That's okay. I just want to see her face once, even through glass. The warden's hand tightened around the clipboard. She'd processed hundreds of inmates, witnessed dozens of final hours. But none of them spoke like this. None of them made her feel like she was the one on trial. Why now? She asked quietly. After all this time? Isaiah looked down at his hands, the cuffs glinting under the light. Because forgiveness doesn't wait for perfect timing, he said. Sometimes it's the only thing you can still give. Elena looked at him longer than she should have. She recognized his name, Isaiah Cole, from an old case file. Back when she was still a young clerk, trying to prove herself in a system that didn't forgive mistakes. She remembered signing her initials on the margin of a document that had helped send this man here. She swallowed hard. I'll see what I can do. Isaiah nodded once. Thank you, ma'am. As she turned to leave, he said softly, You were there, weren't you? When they sentenced me. Elena froze. I was just doing my job. So was I, he replied, until the truth got in the way. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt heavier than steel. Walking down the corridor, Elena couldn't shake his words. For the first time in her career, the walls didn't feel like protection. They felt like confession booths, and every door she passed whispered a question she'd avoided for 20 years. What if we got it wrong? That night, Isaiah couldn't sleep. The cell was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Maya, standing on the porch the day they took him away, holding their daughter in her arms. The sky had been the color of ash. Ava was crying, and he remembered promising, Daddy will be home soon. He broke that promise. The next morning, the chaplain came by with a small Bible in his hands. You all right, Isaiah? He smiled faintly. As all right as a man waiting for Friday can be. The chaplain sat on the bench outside the bars. Warden Ruiz said you asked to see your family. That's a hard thing to arrange. I know, Isaiah said, but hard doesn't mean impossible. The chaplain nodded slowly. You still believe they'll come? Isaiah looked at his hands, scarred and steady. I don't know if they will, but I believe they should know I never stopped loving them, even when the world stopped believing in me. Later that day, Elena sat in her office, staring at the file in front of her. Cole, Isaiah James. The words looked smaller than she remembered. She flipped through the yellowed pages, photos, testimonies, the judge's final signature. There it was again, her own initials in the corner of a document. She'd been the one who processed his intake forms, the one who typed the date of his conviction. Back then, she thought she was doing her job. Now, it felt like something else. She opened her email and began typing. 2. Texas Department of Corrections Family Liaison Office. Subject, Special Visitation Request, Death Row Inmate Isaiah Cole. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard. She could hear her father's voice in her head. The law isn't about feelings, Elena. It's about order. But order had sent an innocent man to die. Isaiah spent the next 2 days writing letters he knew might never be mailed. One for Maya, one for Ava. The one for Maya began with, You deserved better. The one for Ava began with, I still remember your laugh. He folded them carefully and slipped them between the pages of the Bible the chaplain had given him. On Wednesday afternoon, a guard stopped by his cell. Warden wants to see you. In her office, Elena looked different, tired, but softer somehow. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I've reached out to your family. I can't promise anything, but—" Your daughter replied. Isaiah froze. For the first time in years, his eyes filled. "She did?" "She said she'll think about it," Elena said. "She's in college now, journalism major." He laughed quietly through the tears. "Of course she is. Always had her mother's fire." Elena watched him wipe his face with the back of his cuffed hands. Something in her chest cracked open. "If you could say one thing to her," she asked, "what would it be?" Isaiah looked at the window, where a thin beam of sunlight slipped through the bars. "I'd tell her I forgive them all," he said softly. Her mother, the people who locked me here. I just don't want her to spend her life hating the world for what it did to me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he looked back at Elena. "You ever think about what happens after all this?" She frowned. "After?" "After the keys stop turning, after the lights go out. You think the truth still matters then?" Elena swallowed. "I hope it does." Isaiah smiled, small, gentle, unbroken. "Then maybe that's all the justice we ever get." When he was escorted back to his cell, Elena stayed behind, staring at the flickering light above her desk. For 20 years, she believed justice was measured by rules and paperwork. But that night, as she reread Isaiah's file under the hum of the lamp, she began to wonder if true justice was something else, something that looked more like mercy. The next morning, the prison was still wrapped in silence. But something in Elena had changed. She couldn't stop thinking about his words. Maybe that's all the justice we ever get. She sat alone in her office long before sunrise, staring at Isaiah's case file. The paper smelled like dust and guilt. She turned each page slowly, as if afraid of what she might find. Then, tucked behind a faded affidavit, she saw it, a missing report label. Evidence, number 17. Surveillance footage, convenience store, March 3rd, 2003. She frowned. That evidence was never mentioned in the trial. Her pulse quickened. She typed the file number into the state database. No record found. It was gone. She grabbed her coat and drove 2 hours to the county records facility, a place most people forgot existed. The man behind the counter, old and half-blind, looked up from his coffee. "You don't want to dig in there, Warden," he said. "Those boxes carry ghosts." "Then show me the ghosts," she answered. Inside, she found a dusty box marked Cole, Isaiah J., 2003. She opened it, one folder at a time, until she found a VHS tape wrapped in brown paper. The label was half peeled, but still legible. Footage from Harlan's Market, March 3rd at 9:46 p.m. Her hands shook as she carried it to the viewing room. The video was grainy. Rain blurred the lens, but it was clear enough to see Isaiah, standing outside the store, talking to another man. Then, moments later, the man ran out alone. Isaiah didn't move. He looked confused, then stepped backward, away from the door. A minute later, the clerk was found dead inside. Isaiah had been there, but he hadn't done it. Elena's stomach dropped. She rewound it again and again, watching the same moment until her hands went numb. This was the proof, the missing piece that should have cleared his name 2 decades ago. She found the signature at the bottom of the chain of custody form. Detective Hank Mercer. A note scribbled beside it read, "Do not submit. Inconsistent lighting." Her chest tightened. Do not submit. Someone had buried it. She tracked Mercer down that evening, an old man now, living alone in a small house outside Huntsville. He opened the door with a cane and a look of exhaustion. "Detective Mercer," she said quietly, "I'm Warden Ruiz. I need to talk about the Cole case." At first, he denied everything. Then she placed the tape on his table. The old man's face drained of color. "I told them," he whispered. "I told the DA it didn't add up. They said it'd complicate the conviction, said the state needed a win." "You mean they hid it?" she said. He nodded slowly. We all did, in our own way. We thought we were serving justice. Turns out, we were just serving ourselves. Elena's voice trembled. If this is true, that man's about to die for something he didn't do. The old detective looked at her, eyes heavy with regret. Then you better hurry, Warden. Truth doesn't wait long in your line of work. That night, Elena drove back through the rain with the tape on the passenger seat, her headlights cutting through the darkness. For the first time in years, she wasn't just the warden, she was a witness. Inside the prison, Isaiah sat on his bunk, holding the Bible open to a blank page. The chaplain had left a pen for him. He began to write again, not a prayer this time, but a confession of forgiveness. And while he wrote, Elena Ruiz, the woman who once signed his death, was preparing to fight for his life. In a world that had forgotten mercy, she was about to risk everything to find it again. By Thursday morning, the sky above Huntsville was the color of steel. The air felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside her office, Warden Elena Ruiz pressed play once more on the old tape, her heart pounding with each frame. She knew what she saw was enough to change everything, if she could get someone to listen. She picked up the phone and called the state attorney's office. This is Warden Ruiz. I'm filing an emergency stay of execution for inmate Isaiah Cole. A pause. Then the voice on the other end. Cold, dismissive. Warden, we've been through this. The case is closed. The man confessed. He didn't confess, Elena said sharply. He prayed. You mistook faith for guilt. They hung up. Elena didn't stop. She called the governor's office, demanded to speak with legal counsel. When they told her it was too late, she sent the video file directly to Lynn Nguyen, the governor's advisor, a woman known for following her conscience more than the polls. Lynn called back within minutes. Warden, if what you're saying is true, we can issue a temporary reprieve, but it needs the governor's signature. And he's out of town until midnight. Midnight, Elena whispered. He won't make it. Then you need to buy us time, Lynn said quietly. Whatever it takes. Elena hung up, staring at the clock, 3:42 p.m. In the death row block, Isaiah sat quietly while the chaplain read psalms aloud. His hands were calm, his eyes distant. He wasn't afraid anymore. When the chaplain finished, Isaiah smiled. You ever think God's mercy runs on human time? The chaplain sighed. Sometimes it shows up late, but it always shows up. Outside the prison, thunder rolled across the horizon. The rain had returned, sharp and relentless. Riley, the journalist who'd been following Isaiah's story, received an anonymous email with a single attachment. The missing tape. No subject line, no sender, just a timestamp. 4:01 p.m. Within an hour, she uploaded the footage to her podcast feed under the title, The Evidence They Buried. By sunset, it was already spreading across the state. Elena watched the views climb on her screen. Thousands of comments, reporters calling the prison, protests forming outside the gates. It was chaos, but it was movement, and movement meant hope. She grabbed her car keys and drove to the district courthouse herself, lightning cracking across the highway. Inside her glove box, she carried the original tape and a printed affidavit signed by Detective Mercer. His trembling handwriting confessing what had been hidden. By the time she reached the courthouse, the clerk's office was closed. She banged on the glass until a guard opened it. I need this filed tonight, she said, her voice breaking. A man's life depends on it. The clerk looked at the document, then at her badge. You don't want to get involved in this, ma'am? I already am, she said. Back at the prison, Isaiah was given his final meal, fried chicken, cornbread, and a small slice of pecan pie. He didn't touch it. He just looked at the pie and smiled. My wife used to make this every Thanksgiving, he said softly. Funny how the smallest things bring you home. At 10:30 p.m., Elena's phone rang. It was Lynn Nguyen. Her voice was tight. The governor signed the order, but it's unofficial until he's back in the state. I'm sending the confirmation now. It'll come by fax. You have to hold the execution." Elena ran through the halls, shouting for the control room. "Do not proceed. We have a stay coming through." The officer looked at the clock. "Warden, protocol starts at 11. We can't stop unless we have the paper." "Then stall," she said. "Find a reason, anything." The hallway lights flickered as she reached the lower level. Behind the reinforced glass, Isaiah was already being escorted into the execution chamber. Elena's chest tightened. She hit the intercom. "Hold it. We've got new evidence." The warden on duty shook his head. "Ma'am, procedure's in motion." She pressed her palm against the glass, her voice cracking. "Please, just wait. One more minute." Inside, Isaiah turned his head. Their eyes met through the barrier. No anger, no fear, just quiet understanding. He mouthed the words, "It's okay." The clock struck 11, and somewhere, in a government fax machine hundreds of miles away, the paper jammed. Elena dropped to her knees as the lights dimmed. The sound of the machine buzzed faintly, too late, too slow. Outside, the storm broke open. Rain slammed against the walls like judgment. In that moment, a truth she'd spent her whole life avoiding finally caught up with her. Justice wasn't slow because the system was broken. It was slow because people were afraid to stop it. And tonight, she was one of them. The chamber was cold, colder than it should have been. Elena stood behind the glass, hands trembling, the world around her fading into a low hum. On the other side, Isaiah lay on the narrow bed, straps across his arms and chest. His eyes were open, calm, almost peaceful. The chaplain whispered a short prayer, his voice breaking halfway through. When he finished, Isaiah turned his head toward the small crowd behind the glass. The witnesses, the reporters, the guards, and her. His eyes met Elena's. "Do you have any last words?" the officer asked. Isaiah took a breath, slow and steady. "I do." He looked up toward the ceiling, then spoke softly, like a man talking to someone he trusted. "For 20 years, I prayed for truth. I thought it would come with fire or thunder. But it came through kindness, through one person who chose to listen." He glanced toward Elena. Their eyes didn't move. "I forgive everyone who couldn't see me for who I was. I forgive the hands that signed my name. I forgive the silence that buried me. Because holding on to hate, that's the real prison." The chaplain closed his eyes, whispering amen. Isaiah's voice grew faint. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise. I came home, just not the way she imagined." He smiled once. "And tell her, love outlives everything, even death." The signal was given. The machine hissed softly, the chemicals sliding through the tube. For a moment, Isaiah's fingers twitched, then stilled. His breathing slowed. He looked up one last time, whispering, "Forgive not for heaven, but for peace." Then he was gone. The room stayed silent. No one moved. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Elena pressed her hand against the glass. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was supposed to save you." The intercom clicked. "Time of death, 11:07 p.m. She turned away, but her legs gave out. The chaplain caught her before she hit the floor. "Warden," he said gently, "you did what you could." "No," she whispered. "I did what was right too late." Upstairs, the fax machine finally whirred to life, spitting out the governor's order. The bold letters read, "Temporary stay of execution, effective immediately." The timestamp, 11:06 p.m., 1 minute too late. Rain hammered the windows as Elena walked out of the chamber. She passed the corridor where Isaiah had spent 2 decades. Now empty, silent, clean. On the metal table inside his cell sat the small Bible, open to a page she hadn't seen before. A folded letter rested inside. Her name was written on it. She opened it with shaking hands. "Warden Ruiz, you don't owe me freedom. You gave me something rarer, truth. Don't let them bury it again. Tell my daughter the truth doesn't die, even when the man does. Keep your promise." The ink had bled slightly from his tears. Elena pressed the letter to her chest. And for the first time in her life, the woman who'd kept order for everyone else finally let herself break. Outside, the storm began to fade. The night air was soft again, as if the world itself was finally breathing out. The sun rose quiet over Huntsville the next morning. The storm had passed, but it left everything heavy. The trees, the air, even the hearts of those who worked inside the walls. Elena sat alone in her office, the letter still in her hands. Outside, the flags flew half-mast. No one had told them to. They just did. News of Isaiah's execution spread fast, faster than truth usually travels. But this time, the truth didn't stay buried. The footage, the affidavit, the confession, all of it had gone public. Riley's podcast episode, The Evidence They Buried, hit 1 million plays overnight. Every station in Texas carried the same headline: "Executed man proven innocent." In the middle of the noise, the only thing that felt real was the letter. Elena read it again and again until the words felt carved into her. "You don't owe me freedom. You gave me truth." She printed copies of the documents, sent them to Maya and Ava Cole with a note that simply read, "He was innocent." 3 weeks later, she received a small envelope in return. Inside was a photograph. A young woman standing on a church stage holding Isaiah's Bible. The caption read, "Ava Cole, guest speaker, Restorative Justice Conference, Houston." That Sunday, Elena drove down to the city to attend. The church was full. People she'd never met were crying quietly, holding hands. Ava stood behind the microphone, her voice trembling but strong. "My father's story isn't about death," she said. "It's about mercy. It's about a system that forgot compassion until it was too late. But he forgave anyway." She opened the Bible and read aloud, "Forgive not for heaven, but for peace." Her eyes found Elena in the crowd. She didn't know who the woman was at first, but she saw something familiar in the way she stood, still and broken. After the service, Ava approached her quietly. "You were there, weren't you?" Elena nodded. "I was the warden." Ava's eyes filled, but she didn't step back. "He said you helped him." Elena swallowed hard. "I tried. I just didn't make it in time." Ava reached out, taking her hand. "He said you did." For a long moment, neither spoke. Two women, one who lost a father, the other who lost her peace, standing in the same place, bound by the same letter. Months passed. The state reopened the case. Detective Mercer's testimony led to indictments, and Isaiah's name was officially cleared. The governor signed a posthumous pardon, the first of its kind in years. When the news broke, Elena didn't give interviews. She didn't speak to reporters. Instead, she visited the small cemetery outside the prison. The grass was uneven, the wind dry. She placed a new marker on his grave. It read, "Isaiah James Cole, 1971, 23. Forgive not for heaven, but for peace." She stood there for a while, eyes closed, listening to the quiet. Across town, in a rebuilt church, Isaiah's letter hung framed above the altar. Visitors came to read it, some out of curiosity, others out of guilt. Most left in silence. The story of the man who forgave the system that killed him spread beyond Texas. It became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of faith that refused to die. In her final report to the state, Elena wrote one line that wasn't protocol. "Justice cannot bring back the dead, but mercy can keep the living human." And as the years passed, when people spoke of Isaiah Cole, they didn't say the inmate or the man who died. They said, "The man who taught the world how to forgive."